Step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them. I'm sorry, officer. This is my home. I live here. Ma'am, we received reports of a break-in at this address. I need to see identification. There's no break-in. I just returned from work. My badge is in my briefcase. Don't reach for anything. Hands on the door. Now. Officer, I'm telling you I live here. This is a misunderstanding. That's what they all say. You people always have some excuse. I am Assistant Attorney General Monica Chambers, and I need you to verify. Turn around. Hands behind your back. The security camera mounted above Monica Chambers's front door captured every word, every gesture, every violation that followed. It was 7:43 on a Tuesday evening, September 12, 2023, in the affluent Bethesda neighborhood just outside Washington, D.C. The 47-year-old black woman with rich, dark brown skin stood on her own doorstep wearing a charcoal blazer and burgundy dress, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist, a leather briefcase still gripped in her right hand. She had just arrived home after a grueling 14-hour day prosecuting a federal corruption case, looking forward to nothing more than dinner with her husband and their 2 teenage sons. Her home, a stately brick colonial on a tree-lined street where the median property value exceeded $2 million, represented 2 decades of impeccable legal work and unwavering dedication to justice. What happened in the next 51 minutes would cost one police officer his career, his freedom, and the entire county over $2.8 million in federal settlements. It would expose a pattern of racial profiling so deeply embedded that the Department of Justice would launch a civil rights investigation spanning 3 years and encompassing 47 separate incidents. And it would transform Monica Chambers from one of the nation's most respected prosecutors into a reluctant symbol of systemic racism, her case studied in law schools, police academies, and congressional hearings as a definitive example of how bias destroys both individual lives and public trust. The security footage would be viewed over 32 million times. The federal trial would become required viewing for law enforcement agencies nationwide. And Officer Derek Whitmore's 16-year prison sentence would send shockwaves through police departments across the country. Monica Chambers had built her career on precision, integrity, and an unshakable belief in the rule of law. Born in Baltimore to a postal worker father and nurse mother, she had earned a full scholarship to Howard University, graduating summa cum laude before attending Yale Law School, where she served as an editor of the Yale Law Journal. After clerking for a federal appellate judge, she joined the Maryland Attorney General's office, quickly establishing herself as one of the most formidable prosecutors in the state. Over 23 years, she had prosecuted organized crime figures, corrupt politicians, and white-collar criminals, securing convictions in 87% of her cases. 3 governors, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, had promoted her through the ranks. In 2019, she was appointed Assistant Attorney General, overseeing the criminal division and supervising 43 prosecutors across the state. She lived in Bethesda with her husband Marcus, a cardiovascular surgeon at Johns Hopkins, and their sons David and Joshua, both high school honor students. The family had purchased their home in 2015, one of only 6 black families in a neighborhood of 123 homes. Monica had served on the Homeowners Association board, organized the annual block party, and volunteered at the community library. Her neighbors knew her. They respected her. Several had called her for legal advice over the years. She belonged there, not just as a property owner, but as an integral part of the community fabric. On that September evening, Monica had prosecuted the morning session of a federal embezzlement trial, attended a strategy meeting with FBI agents in the afternoon, and spent 3 hours reviewing evidence for an upcoming racketeering case. She left her office in downtown Baltimore at 6:55, stopped at Whole Foods to pick up groceries for dinner, and arrived home at 7:38. She parked her black Lexus sedan in the circular driveway, gathered her briefcase and the 2 grocery bags from the passenger seat, and walked up the brick pathway to her front door. She was searching for her keys in her purse when the police cruiser pulled up behind her car. Officer Derek Whitmore, a 34-year-old white man with pale skin and a reputation for aggressive stops, had been with the Montgomery County Police Department for 11 years. He climbed out of his patrol car with one hand already resting on his service weapon, his body language projecting suspicion and authority. A neighbor 3 houses down, an elderly white woman named Patricia Reynolds, had called 911 reporting a suspicious person at the Chambers residence. She claimed not to recognize the woman entering the home. She suggested it might be a burglary in progress. What Patricia Reynolds failed to mention was that she had seen Monica Chambers enter and exit that home hundreds of times over 8 years. What she failed to acknowledge was that Monica had helped her carry groceries just 2 months earlier when Patricia had surgery on her hip. The truth, which would emerge during the federal investigation, was that Patricia Reynolds had called the police on Monica 4 separate times over the years, always with vague reports of suspicious activity, always when Monica was simply coming and going from her own home. The pattern was unmistakable. The bias was undeniable. And Officer Whitmore never questioned it for a second. Monica turned toward Whitmore, her expression shifting from confusion to careful composure. She had prosecuted enough cases to recognize the danger in this moment. Her hands were full. She was a black woman on a doorstep in an affluent white neighborhood. And the officer approaching her had already made his assessment before exchanging a single word. She set down the grocery bags slowly, keeping her movements visible and deliberate. She spoke in the calm, measured tone she used in courtrooms when facing hostile witnesses. But what nobody standing on that quiet suburban street knew yet was that this moment was being captured by 3 separate security cameras. Monica's doorbell camera was recording in high definition. Her neighbor directly across the street, David Kim, had recently installed a comprehensive security system after a string of package thefts, and his cameras were pointed directly at Monica's driveway. And Officer Whitmore's own body camera, department issued and activated the moment he exited his vehicle, was documenting every word, every movement, every violation he was about to commit. The video evidence would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Monica Chambers never resisted, never raised her voice, and clearly identified herself as a senior law enforcement official within the first 2 minutes of the encounter. It would also prove that Officer Whitmore ignored her identification, dismissed her credentials, and escalated the situation with breathtaking speed and unmistakable racial animus. Monica attempted to retrieve her official identification from her briefcase. Whitmore shouted at her to stop moving. She explained, speaking slowly and clearly, that she was reaching for her Attorney General badge and state identification. Whitmore ordered her to put her hands on the door and spread her feet apart. Monica complied, her heart pounding but her voice steady, and asked why she was being detained. Whitmore responded that he was investigating a reported break-in and needed to verify her identity. Monica explained, with the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with complexity, that she was the homeowner, that she worked for the state attorney general's office, and that she would be happy to provide documentation once he allowed her to access her briefcase safely. Whitmore's response would become one of the most infamous moments in the case. He grabbed Monica's right wrist, wrenched it behind her back with enough force to bruise the tissue, and snapped a handcuff onto her wrist. Monica cried out in pain and surprise, demanding to know on what legal basis he was arresting her. Whitmore ignored the question entirely. He seized her left wrist, forced it behind her back despite her verbal non-resistance, and secured the second handcuff. He then pushed her against the front door, the impact hard enough that her forehead struck the wood, leaving a visible mark that would be photographed as evidence 3 hours later. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer," Whitmore announced, his tone suggesting satisfaction rather than professional duty. Monica's response was immediate and precise, delivered in a clear, authoritative voice she used when cross-examining witnesses. "I am Assistant Attorney General Monica Chambers. This is my home. I have not trespassed. I have not resisted. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You are committing false arrest. Everything you are doing is being recorded, and you will be held accountable under federal law." The words hung in the evening air. For a fraction of a second, Whitmore hesitated. Then his expression hardened into defensive anger, the reaction of someone who had just realized the magnitude of his mistake but refused to acknowledge it. He grabbed Monica by the arm and began pulling her toward his patrol car. She did not resist physically, but she continued speaking, her words calm and devastating. "Officer, I am giving you one final opportunity to verify my identity before you compound these violations. My husband is inside our home. My identification is in my briefcase. The neighbors you see watching right now can confirm that I live here. You are making a catastrophic error that will end your career and cost your department millions of dollars." Whitmore responded with a statement that would be quoted in every news report about the case, a sentence so nakedly revealing of his bias that it would become a textbook example of racial profiling in action. "Lady, I don't care if you say you're the governor. Someone like you doesn't live in a house like this, and I'm not falling for whatever con you're trying to run." Monica stopped speaking. There was nothing more to say. The violation was complete. The evidence was recorded. And the consequences were now inevitable. David Kim, the neighbor across the street, had been watching the encounter from his living room window. He walked outside, his phone in his hand, and called out to Officer Whitmore, asking what was happening. Whitmore ordered him to go back inside. Kim, a software engineer who had lived in the neighborhood for 6 years, recognized Monica immediately. He shouted that she was his neighbor, that she lived in that house, that there was no break-in. Whitmore threatened to arrest him for interfering with an investigation. Kim, now recording video on his phone, retreated to his property line but kept filming. Marcus Chambers, Monica's husband, arrived home 7 minutes after his wife's arrest. He turned onto their street to find his wife handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser, surrounded by 3 additional patrol cars that had responded to Whitmore's call for backup. Marcus, a composed man trained to handle medical emergencies with precision and calm, felt his world tilt into unreality. He parked his Mercedes SUV and approached the scene, identifying himself as Dr. Marcus Chambers and demanding to know why his wife was under arrest. Sergeant James Kellerman, one of the responding officers, told Marcus that his wife had been detained for investigation of burglary and resisting arrest. Marcus, his voice rising for the first time, stated that this was impossible, that Monica was the Assistant Attorney General, that she lived in this house with him and their children, and that she had never resisted anything in her life. He retrieved his driver's license, which clearly showed the address matching the house behind them. He offered to show family photos, mortgage documents, utility bills, anything that would confirm their residency. Sergeant Kellerman examined the license. He walked over to Whitmore's patrol car and spoke to him through the window. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Kellerman returned to Marcus and told him that his wife would be released pending further investigation, but that they should expect charges to be filed for resisting arrest. Marcus, a man whose professional life required maintaining composure in life-or-death situations, felt something inside him fracture. His voice shook as he asked what specific actions constituted resistance. Kellerman had no answer. Monica was released from the patrol car after 23 minutes in handcuffs. The marks on her wrists were already darkening into bruises. The skin on her forehead, where Whitmore had pushed her against the door, showed a visible abrasion. Marcus wanted to take her to the emergency room immediately. Monica refused. She had a different priority. She walked directly to David Kim, who was still standing in his yard with his phone, and asked if he had captured video of the incident. Kim nodded and offered to send her the footage immediately. Monica then retrieved her own phone and downloaded the security camera footage from her doorbell system and from the comprehensive camera network Marcus had installed around their property the previous year. By 9:30 that evening, Monica Chambers had assembled a complete video record of her illegal detention and arrest. She had footage from 3 separate angles, all in high definition, all time-stamped and date-stamped, all unambiguous in their documentation of Officer Whitmore's violations. She spent the next 2 hours making phone calls. She called the Montgomery County Police Chief. She called the Maryland State Attorney General, her direct supervisor. She called her personal attorney, Rebecca Martinez, a civil rights specialist based in Washington, D.C. And she called the FBI field office in Baltimore, where she had worked closely with agents for over a decade on federal prosecutions. The FBI investigation would soon reveal that this wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next 8 weeks, federal investigators would interview 104 witnesses and uncover a pattern extending far beyond Derek Whitmore into the systemic operations of the Montgomery County Police Department. Whitmore had 41 complaints filed against him during his 11-year career. 27 alleged racial profiling. 14 claimed excessive force. 9 involved false arrests. Every single complaint had been dismissed or resulted in no disciplinary action beyond a written warning that was never entered into his permanent record. And Whitmore's immediate supervisor, Sergeant James Kellerman, had personally signed off on 33 of those dismissals, often within 48 hours of the complaint being filed and with no meaningful investigation conducted. The video of Monica's arrest was posted to social media by David Kim at 10:17 that evening. He uploaded the footage to Twitter with a caption that read, "Just watched my neighbor, Assistant Attorney General Monica Chambers, get handcuffed and arrested on her own doorstep by a cop who refused to believe she lived here. This is Bethesda, Maryland, in 2023. This is what racism looks like." Within 40 minutes, the post had been viewed 15,000 times. Within 3 hours, it had reached 300,000 views. By morning, CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, and the New York Times had contacted Kim requesting permission to use the footage. Monica's doorbell camera footage, which she provided to her attorney, was even more damning. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every word of the encounter was audible, including Whitmore's statement that someone like Monica didn't belong in a house like hers. The video showed Monica's calm demeanor, her clear identification of herself, her compliance with every instruction, and Whitmore's escalating aggression despite her cooperation. Attorney Rebecca Martinez recognized immediately that this was not simply a case of mistaken identity or poor police work. This was a federal civil rights violation of the most clear-cut variety, captured with evidence so comprehensive that conviction was virtually certain. The story exploded into national consciousness on the morning of September 13. The Washington Post ran a front-page story with the headline, "Senior Maryland Prosecutor Arrested at Her Own Home." The New York Times published an investigative piece detailing Monica's distinguished career and contrasting it with Officer Whitmore's complaint history. MSNBC's Morning Joe dedicated a full segment to the case, playing the doorbell camera footage in its entirety and bringing on legal experts who uniformly agreed that Whitmore's conduct constituted multiple federal crimes. By noon, the video had been viewed over 8 million times across various platforms. Civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump tweeted the footage with a caption calling it one of the most egregious examples of racial profiling he had ever witnessed. Public response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted outside Montgomery County Police Headquarters. Local elected officials, including 3 county council members and 2 state delegates, called for Whitmore's immediate termination and criminal prosecution. The Maryland State Attorney General, Monica's direct supervisor, issued a statement expressing complete support for her and announcing that his office would cooperate fully with any federal investigation. The Maryland Legislative Black Caucus demanded a comprehensive review of policing practices in Montgomery County. And the hashtag Justice for Monica began trending nationally, accumulating over 200,000 tweets in 24 hours. Montgomery County Police Chief Robert Wallace initially attempted damage control. He issued a statement expressing concern about the incident and announcing an internal investigation. The statement was carefully worded, avoiding any admission of wrongdoing while promising a thorough review. But the public was in no mood for bureaucratic hedging. The video evidence was unambiguous. The violation was undeniable. And the demand for accountability was deafening. Within 72 hours, under mounting pressure from county officials, state legislators, and federal authorities, Chief Wallace placed Officer Whitmore on administrative leave and requested that the FBI open a criminal investigation. The FBI's involvement transformed the case from a local controversy into a major federal investigation. Special Agent Carla Thompson, a veteran investigator with the Civil Rights Division, was assigned to lead the probe. Agent Thompson's team began by securing all video evidence, including footage from police body cameras, security systems, and civilian recordings. They interviewed Monica and Marcus Chambers at length, documenting not just the September 12 incident but also the 4 previous times police had been called to their home on false reports from Patricia Reynolds. They interviewed David Kim and 17 other neighbors, many of whom expressed shock at what had happened but also acknowledged that they had noticed police stopping Monica's vehicle or approaching her property with unusual frequency over the years. The investigation expanded rapidly as Agent Thompson's team discovered the extent of systemic problems. They subpoenaed personnel files, internal affairs records, and disciplinary documents for every officer. They analyzed stop data, arrest records, and use of force reports to identify patterns of racial disparity. And they established a confidential hotline for community members to report their own experiences with police misconduct. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, 107 people had called the hotline. 43 described incidents remarkably similar to Monica's experience. Black residents in affluent neighborhoods stopped, questioned, detained, or arrested while engaged in completely lawful activities in or near their own homes. One case involved Dr. Jerome Patterson, a black cardiologist detained for 37 minutes while entering his own condominium building in Chevy Chase. Another case involved Teresa Washington, a black attorney handcuffed for over an hour after a neighbor reported her as a burglar while she was moving into her newly purchased home in Potomac. In both cases, Officer Derek Whitmore had been involved, either as the responding officer or as backup. The pattern was unmistakable and damning. The statistical analysis conducted by the FBI revealed disparities that shocked even experienced civil rights investigators. Black residents in Montgomery County were 7.3 times more likely to be stopped by police in affluent neighborhoods compared to white residents. They were 12.1 times more likely to be questioned about their presence in such neighborhoods. And when stopped, they were 4.6 times more likely to be detained or arrested despite identical or lower rates of actual criminal conduct. The data covered a 5-year period and encompassed over 14,000 police interactions. It represented statistical proof of systemic racial profiling that would become central to the Department of Justice's eventual pattern and practice investigation. Monica Chambers returned to work 3 days after her arrest. She walked into the Attorney General's office building at 7:45 in the morning, wearing a navy suit and her official badge prominently displayed, immediately resuming her duties prosecuting the federal embezzlement case. Her colleagues were stunned by her composure. Monica declined offers to take time off. She was not going to allow Derek Whitmore's racism to disrupt her work or compromise the cases she had built. But Monica's experience had fundamentally changed how she understood the system she had served for over 2 decades. She had spent her entire career believing that professionalism, credentials, and adherence to the rule of law would protect her from the racism that plagued so many Black Americans. She had been catastrophically wrong. Her education, her position, her reputation, her home, her neighborhood, none of it had mattered to Officer Whitmore or to the 911 caller who set events in motion. She was still just a Black woman who didn't belong, in the eyes of people who refused to see beyond their prejudice. The realization was devastating, but it also steeled her resolve to pursue every available avenue for accountability. Attorney Rebecca Martinez filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on October 3, 2023, 3 weeks after Monica's arrest. The complaint named Officer Derek Whitmore, Sergeant James Kellerman, the Montgomery County Police Department, and the county itself as defendants. It alleged violations of Monica's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure, violations of her 14th Amendment rights to equal protection under the law, false arrest, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and municipal liability for maintaining policies and customs that permitted racial profiling to flourish unchecked. The complaint sought compensatory damages of $2 million and punitive damages of $5 million, plus injunctive relief requiring comprehensive reforms to police policies, training, and accountability mechanisms. The complaint was 93 pages long, meticulously documented, and supported by video evidence that made successful defense virtually impossible. The criminal case moved forward simultaneously. On November 17, 2023, a federal grand jury in Maryland returned a 6-count indictment against Derek Whitmore. The charges included deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony carrying up to 10 years in prison, false arrest, a federal felony carrying up to 5 years, assault under color of law, carrying up to 8 years, and 3 counts of making false statements to federal investigators during the FBI's inquiry, each carrying up to 5 years. If convicted on all counts, Whitmore faced a maximum sentence of 43 years in federal prison. The indictment also charged Sergeant James Kellerman with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to violate civil rights, based on evidence that he had systematically dismissed complaints against Whitmore and other officers to cover up the department's pattern of racial profiling. The trial of Derek Whitmore began on April 22, 2024, in United States District Court for the District of Maryland. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen, a veteran prosecutor known for his meticulous preparation, presented a case that was both devastating and comprehensive. Over 7 days of testimony, the government called 31 witnesses and introduced 147 pieces of evidence, including all video footage of Monica's arrest, testimony from Monica herself, testimony from Marcus Chambers and David Kim, expert testimony on racial profiling from Dr. Philip Adaba-Goff, a leading criminologist, and testimony from 11 other victims who described remarkably similar encounters with Officer Whitmore. Monica's testimony, delivered on the 3rd day of trial, was the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. She took the stand wearing the same navy blazer she had worn on the night of her arrest, a deliberate choice that several jurors later said made a powerful impression. For 97 minutes, she recounted every detail of September 12, her voice steady but her pain evident. She described the fear she felt when Whitmore grabbed her wrist, the humiliation of being handcuffed on her own doorstep while neighbors watched, and the devastating realization that her credentials, her career, and her reputation meant nothing in the face of racial prejudice. She looked directly at Whitmore when she testified that she had spent 23 years believing in the justice system, prosecuting criminals, and upholding the rule of law, only to discover that an officer with a badge could violate her constitutional rights with impunity simply because he believed she didn't belong in her own home. The defense attorneys attempted to argue that Whitmore had made an honest mistake based on the 911 call and that his use of force was reasonable. The arguments collapsed under cross-examination. Prosecutor Chin methodically dismantled each claim, using Whitmore's own body camera footage to prove that Monica had identified herself clearly and early, that she had complied with every instruction, and that Whitmore's statement about someone like her not belonging in a house like that revealed the racial bias driving his actions. When Chin asked Whitmore directly what he meant by someone like you, Whitmore had no credible answer. His stammering response, captured in the trial transcript, would become another infamous moment in a case full of them. The expert testimony provided by Dr. Goff was particularly damning. Dr. Goff, who had studied police bias for over 15 years, testified that Whitmore's conduct was a textbook example of racial bias in policing. He explained how officers perceive black individuals as threatening in affluent white neighborhoods, how this leads to aggressive interactions, and how departments failing to address these patterns create environments where bias flourishes. He then reviewed the statistical analysis conducted by the FBI and testified that the disparities in Montgomery County were among the most severe he had ever encountered in any jurisdiction he had studied. His testimony was so compelling that the defense declined to cross-examine him, recognizing that any engagement would only emphasize the strength of his conclusions. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and 14 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all 6 counts. The foreman, a retired teacher from Baltimore, later told reporters that the video evidence left no room for doubt and that Whitmore's own words had convicted him more effectively than any prosecutor could. The verdict was announced on May 3, 2024. Monica, seated in the gallery beside her husband and sons, closed her eyes and let tears stream down her face when she heard the word guilty repeated 6 times. It was not joy she felt, but a profound sense of relief that the system, however flawed, had finally delivered accountability. Sentencing took place on July 15, 2024. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison, known for her tough sentences in civil rights cases, heard victim impact statements from Monica and 7 other individuals who had been profiled or mistreated by Officer Whitmore. Monica's statement lasted 12 minutes. She described the ongoing trauma of the arrest, the anxiety she now felt whenever she saw a police car, and the painful conversations she had been forced to have with her teenage sons about how they could never assume that their education, their behavior, or their father's professional success would protect them from the prejudice she had experienced. She spoke directly to Whitmore, telling him that his actions had not only destroyed her sense of security but had also undermined public trust in law enforcement for countless people who had watched her case unfold. She asked Judge Morrison to impose a sentence that would send an unmistakable message that racial profiling under color of law would be met with severe consequences. Judge Morrison sentenced Derek Whitmore to 16 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever imposed in Maryland for a civil rights violation by a police officer. The sentence included 8 years for deprivation of civil rights, 5 years for false arrest to run consecutively, and 3 years for assault and false statements, also consecutive. Judge Morrison stated from the bench that Whitmore had violated his oath, betrayed the public trust, and demonstrated through his long history of complaints and his conduct during the investigation that he posed an ongoing threat to civil rights and community safety. She noted that his actions had not only harmed Monica Chambers but had also damaged relationships between law enforcement and communities of color across the region. She emphasized that police officers who abuse their authority to violate constitutional rights must face consequences as serious as the crimes committed by the civilians they are sworn to protect against. Whitmore showed no emotion as the sentence was announced. He was taken into custody immediately and transported to a federal detention facility pending assignment to a permanent facility. He is currently serving his sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania, designated for protective custody due to his status as a former law enforcement officer. His wife filed for divorce 4 months after his conviction. His 2 children, both in their early 20s, have publicly stated that they no longer have contact with him. He lost his pension, his home, and any prospect of employment after his eventual release. He will be 60 years old when his sentence is complete, a convicted felon with a record that will follow him for the rest of his life. The civil lawsuit against Montgomery County was settled on August 29, 2024, for $2.8 million, one of the largest civil rights settlements in Maryland history. The settlement also included comprehensive injunctive relief requiring the county to implement sweeping reforms to police training, accountability, and oversight. The consent decree, overseen by federal court for 5 years, mandated annual anti-bias training for all officers, the creation of a civilian oversight board with independent investigative authority, the implementation of an early warning system to identify officers with patterns of complaints, and quarterly public reporting on stop data, use of force, and disciplinary actions. The county was also required to hire an independent monitor to assess compliance and issue public reports every 6 months. Sergeant James Kellerman was convicted on federal charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to violate civil rights in a separate trial. He received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. Police Chief Robert Wallace resigned under pressure in October 2024 and was replaced by Chief Angela Harris, the first black woman to lead the Montgomery County Police Department. Chief Harris immediately began implementing the reforms required by the consent decree and publicly committed to transforming the department's culture to prioritize constitutional policing and community trust. The Department of Justice's Pattern and Practice investigation, initiated in January 2024, resulted in a comprehensive report issued in March 2025. The report documented systemic racial profiling, inadequate accountability mechanisms, and a culture that tolerated and protected officers who violated civil rights. The findings led to additional reforms and provided a roadmap for other jurisdictions grappling with similar issues. The report has been downloaded over 150,000 times and is now required reading in police academies and public administration programs nationwide. Monica Chambers returned to her role as Assistant Attorney General, but her experience fundamentally reshaped her approach to every case involving police conduct. She became one of the most vocal advocates for police accountability in Maryland, testifying before the state legislature on bills to reform qualified immunity, strengthen civilian oversight, and mandate transparency in disciplinary records. She established the Chambers Civil Rights Foundation, which provides legal support and advocacy for victims of police misconduct who lack the resources to pursue justice. The foundation has assisted 73 individuals in filing complaints, lawsuits, or criminal referrals against officers who violated their rights, and it has recovered over $4 million in settlements and judgments for victims. Monica also began speaking publicly about her experience, delivering keynote addresses at legal conferences, law school graduations, and community forums. She testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on federal police reform legislation, sharing her story and emphasizing that credentials and professional status offer no protection against racial bias. Her testimony, viewed over 5 million times on YouTube, became one of the most powerful personal accounts of racial profiling ever delivered in a congressional hearing. She used her platform to amplify the voices of victims who lacked her education, resources, and access to power, ensuring that their stories were heard and their experiences validated. The case of Monica Chambers transformed how police accountability is discussed and pursued in Maryland and beyond. It became a landmark in civil rights law, cited in over 40 subsequent federal cases. The security camera footage is now shown in police academies nationwide as an example of how bias can escalate into criminal conduct. Law schools use the case to teach students about Fourth Amendment rights, equal protection, and the importance of documentation in civil rights litigation. In Montgomery County, the impact has been measurable and significant. Complaints of racial profiling dropped 53% in the first year. Use of force incidents declined by 41%. Community trust surveys showed a 19-point improvement in Black residents' confidence in police. Stop data revealed Black drivers now only 2.1 times more likely to be stopped compared to white drivers, down from 7.3 times before reforms. The changes are not complete, but the trajectory is undeniable. Accountability, when backed by comprehensive reform and sustained oversight, can drive meaningful cultural change. Monica Chambers continues to live in the same house in Bethesda where she was illegally arrested on her own doorstep. She and Marcus made a conscious decision not to move, refusing to be driven from their home by racism. The security cameras remain active, a permanent reminder of the importance of documentation and evidence. The neighborhood, shaken by what happened to Monica, has become more aware and more willing to confront bias when it appears. Patricia Reynolds, the neighbor who made the false 911 call, moved away 6 months after the trial, reportedly unable to face the community's judgment of her actions. Derek Whitmore is currently in year 2 of his 16-year sentence. He has no possibility of parole. Federal prisoners must serve at least 85% of their sentences, meaning Whitmore will spend a minimum of 13 years and 7 months behind bars. He will be released, if he survives his sentence, as a 50-year-old man with no career, no family, and no future beyond the stigma of his crimes. His name is now permanently associated with one of the most egregious examples of racial profiling in modern American history. He is a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when bias, power, and impunity collide. Sometimes justice is agonizingly slow. Sometimes it feels impossible to achieve. But when courageous people refuse to remain silent, when evidence is meticulously documented, and when the legal system is forced to confront its own failures, accountability can be devastating and transformative. Monica Chambers proved that racial profiling carries a price that extends far beyond individual victims to entire systems that enable and protect it. She proved that credentials matter less than character, but that character combined with evidence and determination can topple even the most entrenched patterns of injustice. Her 51 minutes in handcuffs became a catalyst for change that continues to reverberate through police departments, courtrooms, and communities nationwide. The doorbell camera footage, the body camera recordings, and the security videos from September 12, 2023, are now permanently archived in federal court records, in police training databases, and in law school libraries. They will be watched by future generations of officers, prosecutors, and citizens as a stark reminder that bias has consequences, that power can be checked, and that justice, however delayed, can still prevail when individuals of courage demand accountability and systems respond with meaningful reform.